Lab number 250. In this lab, we'll focus on two main things. The first one will be fixing issues, for example, digest already in progress error that we got in the console. And the second one, the biggest part, will be focused on actually implementing security. Because as you remember, in previous lab, we were able to call the adapter to get the data from it, but each procedure was declared with security, without security actually. Security was set to false. So now we need to change that, and we need to actually fix the authentication because the data should be secured, and we will be doing that in the second part of our lab. So let's start with the scope apply issue. So as you remember, we had this digest already in progress. We are having it just because we initiated another apply to scope before the previous digest wasn't finished. So in order to change that, there is a really easy way. Just open the lab 250 files folder from Dropbox, or you can find the link in description for this lab, and then open the first code snippet and copy the factory that you have here, save apply, and we'll be using this one instead of actually scope apply by default. So copy this code and then navigate to services.js, and let's pass it here right before our service, like that. So the next thing that we need to do is actually to open the controllers and add a definition to dependency to this safe apply to our controllers. So let's start with this cards controller. Then the chats controller actually can be removed, it does nothing. The messages controller should also have this, because we are doing the scope apply here, as you can see. Settings controller, we don't need anything here, we do not do any scope apply, and the tabs controller also need this dependency. Just like that. And next step for us will be to replace all scope apply entries with the new value. So for that, let's trigger find in buffer and find all entries for scope apply and replace it with safe apply and pass in scope inside, just like that. So now you can see that we have only safe apply, all scope apply was replaced, and we can save our controller's JS file. So now our digest issue doesn't exist anymore, and we can go to security topic. So security within the platform actually nowadays should be tested with device emulator or real device. Because by default, if you're launching it in preview, we are using test confidential client that will allow us always to get the data without any security check. So you can find that configuration in our operation console inside the settings. There is a confidential client, and this test client is used for application preview, so you won't receive any security calls. So we can basically close this preview and also kill it from terminal. And well, the way how now this security is defined is that we are using Open Authentication version 2.0, and you can write the adapter that will actually implement that security check from scratch, or you can base your adapter on some existing examples. So it's really cool about new version that you can go to dashboard, for example, and get the starter code. For example, for adapters, we have here a security check user authentication example, exactly what we are trying to do. So let's download this one. And basically, we can go to the console and then unzip this user login using the command unzip and providing a name. So you can see that we have a user login project here, and basically let's move it to our workspaces. So user login with the command mv to our dev workspaces and then the hybrid wallet. And let's navigate there. So if you will get inside the user login, you may notice that it has a similar structure to our adapters, like the Invoke adapter that we already created. But this one is actually a Java adapter. So it also has the XML with the definition of how it works. It has security properties, so security check definition that is needed. Basically, this is how we define the security check with the name called user login. And this is the way how we can also, through the adapter configuration, specify the number of attempts. For example, how many times you can enter a wrong password before your account will be blocked. How much time do we need to wait before trying again? So this block expiration time in seconds, how long is the successful state valid, and so on. So basically the code of this adapter is located here. It's pretty simple again. We do almost nothing here. The only thing is that we actually check in is that the values that we got from a client side, the username matches the password field. So if those two are matching, we kind of saying that the user is authenticated. Of course, in the real life, we can implement the check by calling the LDAP server or any other user catalog and validating credentials. But here, to simplify the process, we will leave it as is. So in order to use that, first of all, we need to perform the command mfp.adapter build, because here we have only source code, and now after calling the build function, we will have also the target folder where we will have the adapter. This is the kind of binary that can be deployed on the server, and then using adapter deploy command, we can actually deploy this one to server. So now if we will refresh our operational console, we can see that we have the user login adapter deployed here, and it has no resources, but it has security check defined. And again, what is cool about the new version of the platform is that all those settings that you declared in XML, you can change right here. So attempts, how long to wait before the client can try again, and so on. We also can see the configuration file itself here, so it's also stated. So what to do next? Actually, we can go to our application and define security per each app and per each version. So on the security tab, we have a thing called scope elements mapping. So this means that that security check can be mapped to some scope, and this can be actually a random name. And once somebody will secure its procedure, procedure in adapter with this scope name, we can map it randomly in different versions to different security checks. So let's, for example, create a scope called simple. So this is just a definition of random name, and it will be mapped to a custom security check user login, as you can see here. So what to do next? Actually, we can say that we are securing with this scope our adapter procedure. So as you remember, previously we had a mock adapter, and inside its resources we had no security. So let's go and change that. Let's open the adapter XML and change this secured false to scope simple. So I will do it a bit faster with find and replace. Just like that. Now we can save this XML file and actually go back to our adapter called mock adapter and perform the same actions. Firstly build and then deploy. That's all. So now in mock adapter, if we will refresh this operations console, we can see that security is set to simple. So this means that whenever we will try to call this, for example, get cards procedure, we will need to pass that check that is associated with this scope. So again, it's associated inside the particular version of our application for a particular platform. In our case, it's version 1.0. And this scope associated with security check called user login. So now we need to configure also the client side of those checks. So as before, we need to handle the challenges from a server that we will receive. So if you remember the way how it worked previously in our app was that, sorry, let me remove the find, was that we were waiting for MFP init event, and once that event was received, we were actually calling the thing called init complete, and inside init complete we were defining the challenge handler. And basically then we had handle challenge is custom response check. We also had actually the delogin function that was called in a pop-up window that was automatically opened if we are receiving the actually the handle challenge. So if we receive the handle challenge from a server, we open in the model window in which you enter your credentials. Then we check in if it's correct or not, and if it's correct, we were closing the model window and submitting success to this challenge handler that we initially defined. So the way how it's done now is looking similar. It's not one-to-one, it's similar, but we need to replace a lot of things here. So now you can follow two different scenarios. Scenario number one, you can follow what I will be doing and implementing the same changes. Scenario number two, you can actually use the code snippet number 2 and copy the init complete function with all the changes already performed and just replace it here, so the whole function. But as I said, I will be doing it step by step. So we will start with defining the challenge handle, creating the new one. API still has this create challenge handler, but nowadays it exists for doing fully custom challenge. And by default, we need to use create WL challenge handler. And here we need to provide the name of our security check. Our security check name is defined here. This is the security check name, user login, so we need to put it here. Just like that. Then the thing with custom response can be totally removed. We don't need it anymore. So the way how we handle challenge is pretty the same. We still have the API handle challenge, and we will get inside it once server asking us for any kind of credentials and so on. But what is different is the thing that we are getting inside this challenge. So now that challenge is in JSON format, and we don't have things like credential required here. So what we can do is, once we get the handle challenge, it means that we are not authenticated, and we can right away open the model window to actually provide the credentials. So we will open in the model window. Let's also add some kind of login, so it will be easier for us to debug this. I will add something like inside handle challenge. Then we open in this model window. And then we need to check the response. So there are two types of responses that we can get in handle challenge. So the first time is if everything was okay previously. So if we didn't try, for example, to enter credentials yet, so we will have no errors. And the second way of getting response is response with an error. So meaning for previous handle challenge, you replied with wrong credentials. So then you will have the error message inside this response. So we can check if we have this error message by implementing something similar to what we have here. But the API, as I said, was changed a bit, so we don't have this response JSON anymore, and the error message looks like error message like this. So we can say if it's not equal to null, then we can actually create an error message to be present. So let's call it something like message. And here we can provide this error message. And let's also add the new line definition here. So we will have our error split it to two parts. So first one will actually tell us what is the error, and the second one will tell us how many attempts we still have to enter the correct credentials. So that's why I'm putting the new line definition here. So and of course this should be a message. So else, if we don't have error, we will just create a message here, something like this data requires a PIN code, and let's also add a new line definition. And finally, what we will do is we will combine the message that we previously defined to the second part that will tell us about remaining attempts. So remaining attempts, as you remember, I was saying that we defined that in our user login, in our security check definition. So this is the way how to override it, and the way how to access it is actually to read response that we will get from a server, and remaining attempts. Is the way how to access it. So now when we'll have the message, we actually need to map it to the same logic that we had before. As you remember, we had this error text that was displayed only when we had an error. So this error text can be mapped to our prepared message. And then we need to say that display error will be equal to true. Then we will see this error text. And the final thing is, as previously, we also need to apply changes in scope. So basically, that's all for this handle challenge. It will work as expected. But we will also need to define two more things: handle failure and process success. So those are the things that will be called in case of failure and in case of success. Process success is not a mandatory thing, so you can ignore this part, but we will use process success to actually close the model window when we received the successful authentication confirmation. So that can be constructed in a similar way. So we will have actually here, instead of handle challenge, handle failure. And of course, we will have some response to work with. And let's have also here the logging. And then we can actually copy the values from handle challenge to display an error. So error texts, let's say something like auth error, and basically display error equal to true, and then save apply for scope. And let's copy it once again, but now we will implement the process success. Just like that. So in this case, we need to clear user credentials that we had in our fields that user entered. So for that, we need to clear the user, because in scope user, we were passing those credentials. So the error text can be empty then. Display error can be set to false, so we won't see any errors. And the final thing that we need to do here is to call scope close model. And before doing that, we can also apply the changes to scope. Just like that. So then this part can be removed. It was previous part from previous configuration. Then we will work with login. So do login, a function, as you remember previously, was called when we actually click in the sign in button in our pop-up window, and previously we were creating this kind of invocation data with the definition of adapter, procedure, and so on, because we had adapter-based authentication at that time. So now everything can be a bit different. It is a bit similar, but not equal one-to-one. So we can remove this part for now. And before actually finishing the login function, we can just submit the challenge answer. And again, we will have here our realm challenge handler, then API submit challenge answer. And then inside we can write here pass the username and the password. Again, this is JSON, so we need to pass the structure like username equal to some value. In our case, it's scope user.name, and also the password equal here to scope user.password, just like that. Now we can save this file. Now dot with comma, of course, at the end. So basically that's it. We fixed the init complete function here. Before continuing with the real test, we can actually launch the emulator first, because as I said, in preview, we won't see any security check. It will always use confidential client, the test client that will always allow us direct access to data. So let's start the emulator first. So for that, you need to open the main menu and click on Android emulator inside the programming, and then start the Nexus 5 emulator. Here we can define the DPIs, so let's have it something like 100 or even 110. This should be enough. And in a few moments it will start the emulator. So while emulator is starting, we can go back to our application and perform a few things. So the first one is the Cordova prepare command. The next one is Cordova build command, actually. And then after emulator will start, we can actually launch the particular deploy on mobile device. So our emulator started. We just need to wait until Cordova build will finish, and we can do the Cordova emulate Android then. So finally it finished. I've cut that time a bit on video. So first time it always takes a while. We downloaded the Gradle, all the packages and the first build. So now when everything finished, we can actually run Cordova emulate Android to launch this app on our emulator. So here we go. As you can see, it opened the model window, and that can happen only when we actually receive the challenge. So what you can also see here is that we have this data requires a PIN code and remaining attempts equal to 3. Let's try to enter non-equal one-to-one username and the password and click sign in. So we are seeing that wrong credentials node and remaining attempts equal to 2. Let's try to enter something equal each to each. So I will enter the test as the username and test as the password and click sign in. And yep, now you can see that we signed in, and we actually able to get all those services like get cards, transactions. We received the data, we had messages, meaning the JSON store is also working. Our settings is also working. We are able to change the limit. So basically, this is how it's happening. We just configured security using open authentication 2.0 in our app, and in the final lab for this small lab series, we will be focusing on sending and receiving push notifications. But on this step, this lab number 250 is finished. Thank you.